Hi, how you doing? I wanted to make a short video by way of a review of the tournaments at Fightcamp. For those of you that aren't aware, Fightcamp is a big 3-day event focusing on all different aspects of HEMA. There are classes, numerous classes throughout the day. You can do unarmed, you can do longsword, you can do sword and buckler, single-hand sword, all sorts of different things. But also, there are a number of different tournaments in different styles of HEMA throughout. Now, I didn't take part in any of the tournaments, but as you might imagine, I was involved in both of the single-hand sword tournaments. I was a line judge in the synthetic backsword stroke sabre tournament, and I ran the steel sabre tournament. So I was quite heavily involved, and I had a fairly unique viewpoint on them. Now, this year, everything was done a little differently. Normally, what's happened is everybody signs up to the tournament at the event. Then there are essentially knockouts. So people are drawn against each other, the winner goes through to the next round. And so on and so forth, until you're left with one person and that person's the winner. Now this year, things were done a little differently. The downside to the knockout tournament has always been that a lot of people, half of the people in fact, will only ever get one fight. And people travel for a lot distance, and they spend a lot of time training to come along to tournaments like these, and then they get one fight. And it's not necessarily a fair representation of how good you are, and it's not really necessarily a fair representation of skill or ability or anything like that, because if you're up against the person who then goes on to win in the first round, you've had one fight, you're knocked out at the very beginning, and you may be the second best fighter in the tournament. So this time, what Matt Easton and Lucy and the stewards and the tournament organisers wanted to do was try something a little different. So everybody was split into pools. Rather than having a knockout from the very beginning, what happened is people were put into groups of 4 or 5 people, and everybody within that pool fought everybody else. And the scores were totted up, and the person with the highest score at the end of all the pool fights was the person that went on to the next round. So everybody got to fight a little bit more, and if you happen to have somebody who was if you like, was very good at negating your style of fighting, but not necessarily a better fighter than you, you may then go on anyway. If you get to score more points overall, if your cumulative score is higher than theirs, then you move on to the next round. And what that tended to do was give you another set of pools in the next round, and that would give you one last pool for the final. Now, in general, it worked very well indeed. The people that got through were all very good and all very skillful, and the people that got through to the final pool were, without a doubt, all excellent fencers. So to win the tournament was a real achievement. And people had to have a lot of fights, and they had to do well in a lot of fights to win. The single-hand synthetic tournament was won by Jonathan Middleton, a fantastic fencer. And the steel sabre tournament was run by Mattis Kuhl, again, another fantastic fencer. So clearly, to a degree, these tournaments, the new structure, did exactly what they were hoping to do. They got everybody to have a lot of fights, and they allowed the most skilled to go on and win. So from that point of view, absolutely brilliant. I don't have any issues with that. The tournaments were great. There were a couple of downsides that I personally saw. One was the fact that because there was a lot more fighting, it was much harder to fit into the programme. So it's forcing people to choose a little more between tournaments and classes. And that's always a bit of a shame, because I think the classes are really what Fightcamp's been about up to press. Obviously, the tournaments have grown and grown in popularity, but the fact that we've got this huge area and there are classes going on all the time mean that you can study some really unusual things. And that's kind of what gives Fightcamp its flavour, and that's been a little bit harder for people to do if they've been involved in the tournaments. But, you know, when there's 200 people at an event, that's not necessarily a bad thing for somebody who's teaching the classes, as I was, that even though there were pools going on, I was still getting 20 people in a class. And when you're teaching classical pugilism, you don't really want more than that, because it's very hard to give anybody the attention that they need in a class and have them go away learning anything. So it's potentially a downside, but not a huge one. The timing of the pools was again something that I'd maybe like to look at in the future. The synthetic backsword tournament, so if you like, the entry-level single-hand sword tournament, was at the beginning of the very first day. And normally what happens at Fightcamp is you turn up and you see people and you meet old friends and you have a bit of a chat and you do a bit of light sparring and you kind of loosen up a bit and you get into the right mindset and you're ready to fight. So in the afternoon when the tournament starts, you're good to go. Whereas this year, what happened is people turned up, and some people like me got up very early on Friday morning and drove to the site, and we got there and we got set up and we dumped our kit, and the tournament started straight away. The very first thing that anybody did was to fight in the pools. And I think that proves a little bit difficult for some people. I don't necessarily think it would have changed the overall result, but I think it may have changed the way some of the pools worked. So that's maybe something that's worth thinking about. The other thing that I found was that knockout tournaments seem to give people a different environment. There's a different level of stress. When you enter into a fight and you know you have to win this fight if you're going to progress, then that makes it a little bit more of a stressful environment than knowing that, yeah, this fight's not too big a deal because I know I'm also going to be fighting him and I know I can score a lot of points on him. So it doesn't matter if I do brilliantly well against this person as long as I do very well against them. And it kind of makes the individual fights themselves a little bit less important. So what I'd quite like to see maybe next year is to have pools for the first round and let people go through and then have a knockout tournament. Now, obviously, what you'd like is maybe to have, say, 16 people go through to the knockout tournament, and then you're 16, 8, 4, and 2, and so on. And then you get this nice fight, because obviously with pools, people get more fights. And if you're knocking that down to 4 people straight away, then it becomes very fast and it's over very quickly. Those of us that are watching or judging or running the tournament, it's nice to see the fights. So you'd want to maybe increase the number of people that went through from the pools. As it stood this year, only the individual winner of each group went through. And as there was no seeding in any way, what that meant is if a pool had 2 or 3 people in it who were very, very good, and some of the pools did, only one of those people could go through. Whereas in theory, any one of those people could go on and win the tournament if they go through. So perhaps what I'd like to see is the winner of every pool go through, and then maybe 4 or 5 of the highest scoring losers, if you like. Loser isn't the right word, because these people are very, very good. But you get the idea. So runners-up, perhaps. So the top 3 or 4 runners-up. And that would then give you a knockout tournament that you could do, and that would up the pressure for the individual fights. And we get a bit of the best of both worlds. One of the other things that I found a little bit strange about the pool system, and that's just an artifact of the way it works, is that you could beat somebody fairly conclusively in your pool, yet they would go through. And that seems a little bit odd to me, that if a pool of 5 people, you have a pool of 5 people, and say I was in that pool and I beat somebody else in that pool who's a good fencer, I'm a good fencer, and I beat them this time, and I do it relatively conclusively, but they score a few more points than me against the other people, they can go through. And you can see why. There are arguments in both directions. Yes, overall they may be a more rounded fencer, but if I'm better than them at fighting, surely I'm the one that should go through. Yeah, am I better? Am I not? Yeah, well, that's open for debate. But again, if we were to have some form of seeding or the highest placed runners-up go through, that may resolve that situation. But anyway, in summary, the tournaments were great. The tournaments I was involved with, they were fantastic. The level of sportsmanship was brilliant. Fighters were calling hits and clarifying. When the judges got things wrong, fighters were saying, no, he really did hit me. Or when a shot was called as a body shot, people were saying, no, that actually clipped my mask. So that's fantastic to see. I thought the level of judging was, in general, very good. There were a couple of glitches. There always are. But the ability to let the person running the tournament say, look, I'm not happy with what's just been called, let's replay that point, I think helped to a degree with that. And that didn't happen hugely often, but it was there, and it did happen. But overall, I think the level of skill of the competitors was incredibly high. And year after year, there's been a really distinct and noticeable improvement in the level of skill, the form that people are showing, especially in the single-hand tournaments. You can see very clearly now individual styles coming through. And more of the things that you see in the manuscripts that we weren't really able to do in tournament 5 or 6 years ago are being done in tournaments now. And that, in a way, is a real benefit. It shows that tournaments perhaps are the right thing to do. Initially, people argued against tournaments because people were playing the rules, and the form of fighting that you saw in tournaments wasn't what you saw in the manuscripts, and that's less and less the case. And I think that perhaps those people who are anti-tournaments are going to find themselves marginalised as those of us that are involved in the tournament scene improve in skill and improve in ability and improve in the way they can actually fight under pressure against a completely non-compliant, resisting opponent, and yet still demonstrate the form and the techniques shown within the manuals. So, I don't want to turn this into a rant about how awesome tournaments are, but the tournaments at Fightcamp were awesome. The people that competed in them were all brilliant, and the people that went on to win them and place in the medals in the tournaments were all fantastically skilled. So if that was you, congratulations, well done. You really made my weekend showing the level of skill you did. Thank you very much, and I hope next year I'm involved yet again, and I hope that we can improve the tournaments just a little bit more for everybody involved. So I'll stop wittering on now, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.